and welcome back to my channel. In today's video I'm going to combine everything we've learned so far and build a dashboard similar to this one. This is going to be a little longer video, however please stay tuned as this knowledge is really important. As you can see, changing a parameter will trigger reaction in the graph as well as the table and values here. So without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to use this simple OneNote document I created to smoothly go through the video. Let me start with outlining what I'm expecting from a dashboard based on my experience. Easy to refresh. Dashboards usually summarize data that constantly changes. The easier it is to refresh, the more frequent we can do it. If we can do it more frequent, we gain accuracy. In my file, I'm simply using the refresh button to do it. I don't require any copy paste or any additional sources, so I believe we can tick the first box. Easy to read. Now, it's not enough to only be good in Excel and understand the program. The real value lies in the ability to present it to others. Remember that some people might not be familiar with Excel at all, so while creating dashboards, we need to make sure that the user interface is as simple as possible. In our case, it only requires one input and everything else is linked and presented, so I believe the second tick box we can tick as well. Finally, I want the file to be fully automated. I don't want users or myself having to come back and change the formulas to accommodate for exceptions. I'm achieving that by using the Power Query editor and ensuring that all the steps are exactly the same each time we refresh the file. Now, with all that said, let's open a brand new spreadsheet and build the dashboard. I want my dashboard to give me details of all the companies traded on London Stock Exchange. The best source of information therefore is the London Stock Exchange website. If I hover over statistics and go to statistics home, view all companies and securities, and this time I will right click on the file XLS and copy the link. Now if I come back to our blank file, I can go to data, get data from other sources, from web. In the pop-up window, I'll right click and click paste. If I click OK to that, Excel will ask me which part of the spreadsheet I want to import into my book. In my case, this is going to be companies, and I'll click on transform data as we need to do some changes. The very first problem I can see is that the first 5 rows don't really contain any data and the headers are stored in a 6th row. Now let me show you the file to better understand what's happening. Now, what we just did is create a connection to the file online. The file looks like that, and as you can see it's orientated towards being user friendly and looking nice, not necessarily for connecting the data. So as you can see here, the first 5 rows indeed are blank, which we will need to fix in our Power Query editor. Using the Power Query editor functionality, I'm going to ask Excel to remove the first rows. If I click on remove rows, then remove top rows, I now have a chance to tell Excel how many rows do I want to remove. In our case, this is going to be 5. Now you will notice that it added a step here, which means each time we refresh the query, it's going to repeat the steps exactly the same way. This is good, however, we still need headers to be the first row. So in order to do that, we can click on use first row as headers. And just like that, we have a data to work with. There are 2 additional steps I want to take here. If I scroll to the right, first of all, I want to make sure this column is a number. So if I select the entire column and change the data type to any, I can click on decimal number. And then I want to make sure that everything that's not a number is not displayed there, so I can go to remove rows, remove errors. Those were probably some explanations we don't need anyway. Having done that, we can now close and load. Before going any further, let's quickly scan through the data. If I go to the right, everything seems correct, and if I go all the way down, I'll hold Ctrl and press the down arrow. We can see that there are 2 more rows which don't really have anything valuable for us. So let's go ahead and fix that in the Power Query editor. If I click on get data and then load Power Query editor, I can do a similar thing we did at the very beginning and say remove rows and then bottom rows, which in our case is going to be 2. So if I click 2, once again Excel added an extra step, and if I wanted to, I could move it right after this one, which will save us some space. I can click close and load, and very soon Excel will get rid of the last 2 rows. Just to finish off here, I'm going to rename it to data, and then maybe select the entire admission date column and make it a short date to make it look nicer. Using the Power Query, we have successfully collected the data and transformed it to the format which we can now use to create our dashboard. Let's now try to design the output we desire. I'm going to start with renaming this tab dashboard and copying some initial values we want to display. So if I go all the way up, we can borrow the headings from our data tab. If I click Ctrl Shift and arrow to the right and copy that by pressing Ctrl C, I can go to dashboard, and then maybe in cell B2, if I right click and say paste special, I only want to paste values and I want to transpose the values. So if I click OK to that, we get our basic information. I will not worry about the formats just yet, however I do want to add a couple of things. So I will call this attribute, and then we will have ICB industry market cap, then I will have ICB super sector market cap, as well as market cap. For each one of those, I want to have the minimum, I want to have the maximum, and I want to have an average. What I would also like to be able to see is the number of companies that fall into that bucket. So I'll add one more column here. Now let's start adding the functionality. Let's extend those columns to make it a little bit more visible, and let me add one more row. If I right click on row 3 and say insert, Excel will give me one more row. I could achieve the same effect by pressing Ctrl+ or Ctrl+Shift=. Now I want users to only be able to select companies that do exist within a spreadsheet, and we can use data validation to achieve that. With cell B3 highlighted, I can go to data validation, and from the drop down select a list. For our source, we're going to select the column from a data tab, and I'm going to select the entire company name column. If I click OK to that, as you can see, Excel will now only allow me to choose values from within that column. There is a little problem with doing it this way. If I go back to my data validation and look at the source, as you can see at the moment it's linking to an absolute reference, meaning that the last row would be 1943. If tomorrow there's a new company added to the spreadsheet, it will not be captured. There is a way to fix it, and I'm not going to explain in detail. However, just for now, I'm just going to manually type it. Indirect companies and then company name. And I can assure you, I will explain this once we get to our tables video. If I click OK to that, you will see that effect is exactly the same, with the exception that if the length of data changes, it will still be captured in this validation list. Now let's take advantage of the VLOOKUP formula we've learned in my very first video. I'm going to go to cell C4 and click on equals to VLOOKUP, and in my case VLOOKUP value will be in cell B3. I need to click F4 to once again make it an absolute reference. For my table array, I'll go to data, and starting from company, I will go all the way till the end. Now it's not needed for this specific value, however I want to copy and paste this formula, and this will make it easier. I'll hit comma and press 2, then 0 for the range, and just like that we have the industry. Now this industry will be changing when we change the company. So what the program does is looking up the value for a selected company. Now because I've selected all the columns, I can simply drag the formula down all the way to international issuer. However, I need to slightly change it in each row. See, the first one is looking in the second column, where ICB super sector appears in the third column. So if I overwrite 2 with 3, and then 4, 5, 6, and 7, I get most of the work done. For the market capitalization value, I'm going to use SUMIF formula, which we've learned in my second episode. So if I start typing SUMIF, for my range, I'm going to select the entire company column from my table. I'll click comma, then company name in our dashboard, and the sum range in our case is going to be the market capitalization column from this table. If I close the bracket and hit enter, you can see that we have a relatively simple dashboard that should be changing the values as we change the input criteria. I will now take advantage of the formulas we've learned in my most recent video, so let me do the first one, which is the min-ifs, and then the minimum range is going to be my market capitalization column from this tab. My criteria range is going to be the ICB industry, and then my input is going to be cell C4, which of course will be changing depending on the company selection. So if I click F4 to make it an absolute reference, just in case, close the bracket, I can see that the minimum market capitalization for consumer discretionary ICB industry is 0.56 million. I'm going to do exactly the same for the super sector. So if I click on min-ifs, then the minimum range is going to be the market capitalization. The minimum range criteria in this case is going to be the ICB super sector, and the criteria is stored in cell B5. If I close the bracket, that should give me the correct value, and let's quickly do the same for the market. Min-ifs, and then in this case, once again, market capitalization. This one is going to be the market, and the criteria we have in our C8 value. I'll press F4 for the absolute reference. Now, if you're not confident with those formulas, I encourage you to watch my previous video, as well as practice here for the maximum and average values. In my case, I'm just going to use a little bit of a shortcut. If I copy the entire text, I can paste it here, as well as here. For the second row, the formula differs, so I'll again have to copy the entire text and paste it in here, as well as here, and exactly the same for the last one. I click that, and one more time. What I can do now is if I select this range and then on my keyboard press Ctrl H, which is the shortcut for replace, I can say that I want to replace min-ifs with max-ifs. The formula is exactly the same except for this wording, so if I click replace all, I get the correct formula. I can do exactly the same here, replacing min-ifs with average ifs. And just like that, I saved a little bit of time on preparing this file. What we've done so far allows me to compare a given company market capitalization to different attributes. For example, I can see here that this company is higher than the minimum, but lower than the maximum, and lower than an average. However, to make the picture complete, I need to know how many companies in total appear within a given attribute. To do that, I'm going to use COUNTIF formula, which we've learned in one of my previous videos. I know that the company name is a unique value, and as you can see here, we always have a ICB industry, ICB supersector, as well as market next to the company. So what I can do is simply write a COUNTIF, and then for my range criteria for ICB industry, I'm going to select the entire ICB industry column, and my criteria is going to be our ICB industry, which is stored in cell C4. I'm going to do the same for the other two off camera to save us some time. Just to show you all the formulas in case your number differs from mine. This is what I input, and just to prove that it works, let me just select a couple of companies. As you can see, all the values change as I select a different one. And I believe we can move on to the next part. So let's work on the format of our file. I'll start by selecting the entire text and changing the font to the one I can't really pronounce, however I'm sure you will know which one is it. This is a font commonly used by Microsoft, and I believe it's very clear and you can easily see the values. I'll also change the size to 16, and I also want to make sure that we are not seeing grid lines to make sure that the data stands out a little more. So if I go to view, I'll deselect grid lines. Now let's make this first column a little bigger to make sure that I can see the values. For the numbers part, I want to make sure I display commas in case they are in thousands to make it more readable. So if I select all those and then holding Control select the C10 column, I can go to Home and change that to number as well as comma to present the thousands. I will now highlight the criteria to extinguish them from the rest. So if I click on company name and then holding Control select the entire range here, I can make them bold. Since those are input, I will put semicolon at the end, colon at the end, and I'll do the same for all the other ones. That will give us an impression of a form. Now I will select cell B to C3 and change it to merge and center, which is a button here. And I'll create a darker highlight. Let's maybe use this one. I will also change the font to white to make it stand out. I will do a similar thing for alternating rows to make it a little bit more readable. So if I maybe choose some brighter blue color, I can now double click on the edge of C column to make sure that we have enough room to display the information. It does begin to look better. However, if I change that to a different company, you can see that those can be longer. So I'll once again double click on C column to make it as big as I can possibly see here, and then to make it visually nicer, I will once again merge those two cells together. And for all the other ones, I'm going to select middle as well as vertically centered. To finish off this section, I'm going to insert a shape. So if I go to insert and then illustration, from the shapes drop down, I will select this rectangle with the rounded edges. And then if I click within cell B2 holding Alt key, this will ensure that my shape snaps to grid. If I do it all the way to cell C10, it will draw a shape like that. We need to get rid of the fill because we want to be able to see what's inside, so I'll change it to no fill. And also we want to make sure that those edges are aligned with our grid, so I can use this yellow dot to make the rounding different. I will also choose a different thickness, so let's change it to 3. And for the color, let's maybe choose some lighter blue. Now let's take care of the second section. I'm going to start by moving those into central positions one more time. So center here and center here. I will do the same for the numbers. And the headings I want to make bold. Let me actually, using the opportunity, make sure that this column is wide enough. Let's maybe apply some border at the bottom. So if I go to borders, more borders, and then select the tick line bottom, and in here I want to have all borders, so I can simply click on that. I could choose it from a drop down menu, and once again let's make those two highlighted in lighter blue to differentiate from the others. Now I can copy the shape to make an outline. So if I click anywhere within the line, I can hit Ctrl C and then Ctrl V. And now once again, while moving this shape, if I hold Alt, it's going to snap to the grid. So I want to make sure it snaps to cell B12. I can release my mouse button, and now again holding Alt, I will resize it to match the entire section. Now before moving on to conditional formatting, I've spotted one thing, so let's quickly fix that. I wanted all those numbers to be centered, however they didn't, and the reason for that is because somehow Excel automatically assumed this is the accounting data type. I will also select the cell C10 and then I can change it all to number. You can see now that they will be in the center, which visually looks a little bit nicer. I have all the data I want, but I want to make it easier for people to quickly spot what they're looking for. I want to be able to tell whether the company market capitalization is higher, lower, or the same as, for example, market average or the industry market cap. Is it higher than the minimum, lower than the maximum, and so on. I can do that by using conditional formatting. If I select the entire range, I can go to conditional formatting and select icon sets and then those three arrows. At the moment it's not doing the correct job because the formula is a default one, so let's change that. If I once again go to conditional formatting, manage rules, and then edit this rule. First thing I want to do is to reverse the order of my icons because I want to start with the red one. Second step will be to change that to number. And now let's go step by step adjusting the formula. If any of those values is greater than my value in C10, then I want to make sure that the arrow is red, which would mean that the market capitalization of my company is lower than one of those. So to do that, I'll change that to is greater than, and then for the value, I will just use C10 cell as a reference. Now, if the value is exactly the same, I want to use the greater than or equal to, because the only option there would be if the value is equal. So once again, linking it to this cell. Now, the very last scenario will be what covers the rest, which in this term will show me the green arrow. Let's click OK and see if that works. Let me first extend the column so we can see better. Maybe even more. Okay, so now let me change to a company I know that has a minimum value equal to market capitalization. And as you can see, in this case, the arrows are pointing to the number, which means the number is the same. In this case, the minimum market capitalization is actually higher than this company, and everything else is lower. So our conditional formatting seems to be working. As a very last step, I want to add a very simple graph that will let me compare different attributes between each other. So if I just select the entire attribute column and then the entire average column, I can go to Insert and then click on Recommended Charts. I'm going to choose Clustered Column Chart. And if I click OK, we should get a nice little graph here. To complete the file, I'm going to format our chart. I'll start by holding Alt and moving the chart around cell D2 and then extending it, still holding Alt, to make sure it fits all the columns. Now I want a little bit of space, so I will release the Alt button and now move that line a little bit. If I right click on any of the bars, I can now format data series. The very first thing I want to do is decrease the gap, which in my case is going to be around 30%, to make the bars a little bigger. Since I have this menu open, let's add the border. At the moment I have the bars selected and I want to apply the border to entire chart. So I need to click somewhere within the chart area, go to border and choose a solid line, which we're going to pick the color similar to what we have in our remaining part of the chart, and make sure that the join type is round, plus select rounded corners. What we also need to do is select the weight, which in our case was 3 points if I remember correctly. Okay, yeah, actually it looks a little bit too thick, so I believe it was 2.75, and we need to change the color because I've just selected a darker shade of blue. I can close this window, and as you can see, we slowly have our final product. The very last thing I want to do is the data labels to make it more readable. So if I right click within any of the bars, I can say add data labels, and I'm going to add data labels. We could click within them and make them bold to stand out a little more. That, I believe, completes our formatting part of the spreadsheet. Let's quickly take a look at the file. I get one input cell which allows me to swap between companies. Depending on my selection, I'm going to get basic information about the company as well as information about the broader selection, meaning industry market, ICB industry market, ICB super sector, as well as the market. The graph will allow me to compare the three together, showing how big the sector or subsector is within a given market. And the table here will allow me to quickly scan through if the values are higher or lower than my market capitalization. All this allows me to very quickly evaluate a given company. However, this data will be changing. Tomorrow this list might be completely different, so in order for me to keep it up to date, I need to refresh it from time to time. If I go to data and then click on queries and connection, if I hover over our only query, Excel will tell me that the last time it was refreshed was Tuesday. If I click on refresh, Excel will automatically pull the latest data and the dashboard will update as well. I can now close the queries and connection and enjoy the brand new list with up-to-date data. This concludes the first series of videos on my channel. I would like to thank everyone for watching, even if it was only one of them. If you want to stay up to date and watch me creating videos for when the data gets bigger series, please hit subscribe and the bell button. For now, thank you very much and hoping to see you soon.